So I do want to. Okay, here's a question from Michael Olewski. Okay, how do you approach helping broaden a student's sound? Okay, so I think we have to define what broaden means, and I don't want to sound like a politician sort of skirting around the question, but I think that it's sort of like how one person's bright is another person's dark, um, or those terms are subjective enough that it's important to define my perspective on that before I start. When I want to hear a broader sound, I want to hear a sound that fills the room up, which means that it also needs to have a certain amount of presence, immediacy of the sound, immediacy. I want the lips to respond to the wind, and I want the sound to fill up the room. Whatever the size of the room is, it needs to fill the room up, not just the sort of directional brass thing where we, point our sound at the listener, but a sound that fills up the space in every direction, kind of like that spray foam that you put in a door or a window that you mount into a new wall. It fills up all the little crevices and crooks. However, you run the risk with that of the sound getting too big and too diffuse. And I think that sometimes we can do things with our embouchure, with our face, to make the sound bigger, but we lose focus, and we do things with the embouchure that can cause a player to lose some control. So to me, it's a gradual thing. It's a thing that starts with simple awareness of getting the notes to speak. And I like to use the mouthpiece sparingly. I'm not a 30 minutes of mouthpiece buzzing a day kind of person. I am looking to do just enough to solve the issue or to make it better. So I do just enough to sort of get the lips responding. It doesn't really matter what I play or what on the mouthpiece, but I want to play with very little tongue, if any. Inhale tone with no hesitation between the two. I found that the students that have the narrowest sounds are the ones that have some sort of hiccup in that switch over in the direction of the air change or the change of air direction. I don't know if that makes sense, but that is sort of where I start with that. And then we listen to the player in some sort of recording. I think it's important for them to hear their sound out front. When you have the trombone in playing position, as you know, Mike, but this other people here are not trombone players, so I hear as much of my sound through the bell section into my ear and into my head as I would hear from it going out into the room and coming back at me. But all that to say, I'm still on the other side of the bell flare. And so I like to have a recorder somewhere in the room out there so that the player can hear themselves in the same way that when you first heard your voice on an answering machine or a voicemail, when you could like listen to the voicemail before you sent it, and then you could send it again if you didn't like what you said. You learn a lot about what your voice actually sounds like, and you can learn a lot about what your trombone voice sounds like. So the combination of getting the immediacy of sound, which means coordinating all of those things to make the sound happen when you want in response to the inhale. So inhale tone, and then listening for the sound and making sure that I think that breathing is important. It's obviously something that we do because we're wind players. But I want to make it a musical gesture. I want to make it a musical, like part of the musical phrase. I guess there's not really an exercise that specifically broadens the sound as much as there is just an awareness of what you're doing and making sure that every motion that you make is efficient and part of the process, not a extra musical event that happens beforehand. I also think that one of the things that makes a sound broader is being absolutely as efficient as possible and playing efficient equipment. But there's so many great horns on the market, so many great mouthpieces on the market. There has to be a combination of mouthpiece and instrument that fit each player's setup. And for that reason, I think that it's important that if you are doing these things that I'm talking about conceptually and you're still struggling with delivery of sound, try some different stuff. And the place to do that is not at a convention, by the way. Walking the exhibit floor at TMEA or at ITF or American Trombone Workshop, there's so many people on the floor who are not really testing, they're showing off, and then I can't focus. I can't listen for the things that I that I really want to learn by trying new equipment. Okay, Mike, I think what you say about awareness is key. Building a sound concept via listening and then listening to yourself, like you said. Thank you. Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. I haven't always thought that way about it. It's something that the Arnold Jacobs pedagogy, though I didn't get the chance to work with him directly, changed my life in terms of it's a tool. It's one thing that I can add to my toolkit as a teacher and as a player in terms of focusing on product. And in order to focus on product, you have to be aware of the product. So you have to do things to divorce the analysis of your playing from the moment that you are playing, so that when you're playing, you're just producing. It's a one-way road, right? A one-way street. And then away from the instrument, or at least when not in the act of making music, then you analyze, then you go back and look things over and see what you can make better. I think that the single most important thing that a person can buy as a young musician is a digital recorder, or have something to use with their phone so they can get the highest quality audio recording that they can get. Welcome to the new folks here on the Facebook feed. Appreciate you. Sort of going back and forth. What I eventually would like to be able to do, I don't even know if this is possible. I don't know anything about how this would work, but is there a way that I could have one camera that could feed more than one thing at a time? Maybe I just need to pick a format. I'm just, like I said, this is sort of an unofficial feed, just trying to experiment here. Okay, so I have a question from Blake LaRue. Is there a microphone you would recommend for recording like solo tuba? Audio-Technica AT2020. It's a relatively inexpensive microphone, but the problem with a microphone that uses XLR connections, it doesn't plug in directly to your laptop or to your digital recorder. You have to have the cable that goes with it. And if you're going to record into a digital recorder, if it doesn't have onboard XLR connectors, you have to have some sort of interface that connects the analog signal from that microphone and processes it digitally into the computer or to the digital recorder. So if I recommend a microphone, understand that even though it may be an inexpensive mic or a mic that's affordable, you have other costs that are built into that. It's like when you go to buy a car, it's not just that sticker price, it's plus tax, title, and license. So if you're going to go down that road, I would actually recommend, instead of getting just a standalone microphone, get a digital recorder. The Zoom recorders are good. The H5 is what I tend to use. The pickups and the preamps are pretty solid on that. It's good. It has good guts inside the recorder. It's a workhorse. If you take care of it, it'll take care of you. Get a good case for it, and just get in the habit of using it. It's a tool. Doesn't need to be the $1,000 unit. I think it's $300, but it's $300 well spent, especially if you're going to be a teacher and you want to record rehearsals. You'll get years and years of use out of it. Okay, got another question here, this time on Facebook. Thank you, John Timpany. Some of my band trombones have the tight sound, not because of teeth closed, but I think it's because of tight lips. What are some exercises and ideas to combat this and help them relax? Okay, so do you remember Whiff would talk about when he was an undergraduate student that he would get the shakes so bad that he couldn't play? And that when you try to tell your body to not shake, your body shakes more. And so if you tell a student that has tight lips or whatever it is that's causing the tightness of sound, I think that if you tell them to not have tight lips, that's actually going to make things worse. It's sort of like when you tell your trombone players that their timing is off with their slide and they need to move their slide faster. It's not always the answer. In fact, that's rarely the whole answer. Move your slide faster, but move it later. Typically the smear happens because they move it early because they're trying to move it fast. They equate early with fast. And so they're trying to do what their teacher's asking, and it actually makes the problem worse. And then the teacher feels like the student isn't listening, so they give the instruction again a little bit louder and a little less politely, and it just devolves from there. But in respect to the issue with the tight tone, I think, again, it starts with just a little bit of mouthpiece work. And I think it starts with mouthpiece work without the tongue, and it starts with just getting the lips to respond to the wind. Almost as if I don't want to say like a Pavlovian response where you ring the bell and then the dog's mouth salivates, but the lips need to respond to what happens on the exhale. And there are a lot of different opinions on what makes a great buzzing sound. A lot of different opinions on that. I have been taught at different points in my experience on the trombone to have the aim for the cleanest buzz that you can get. Absolutely no fuzz in the buzz. And that to me has equated with tighter sounds, less resonance in my playing. I'm actually aiming for the most resonant buzz that I can get, which means there's going to be some extra stuff in the sound. It's okay, because when you put it in the instrument, even though it's not quite the same process, you're doing something different. I don't know what the answer is there, but I know that it's different. But I also know that the more that I focus on getting a resonant buzz and get the tongue out of the way, I mean, no tongue at all, lots of sirens, lots of, if you have a melodic line, it's okay for the notes to smear. Excuse me. That airy, not airy, but that resonant big buzz, not necessarily loud. To me, loud implies direction, and I want the buzz to be, again, it's like going out in all directions from the mouthpiece. And trying desperately to keep the pitch solid. You slide up to the note, but when you get to the E, you stay there. You don't waffle on the note. You simply connect the sounds with sound on sound with no break in between. To me, that's the best way to get the lips to respond properly to the wind. And to me, that's the best antidote for the tight sound. It takes time. It also can come from students playing equipment that's too large for them at that point in their development. If they're a second year player, there is thought that a player that as soon as they get out of beginner band, they need to be on a Bach 42 with a 5G. And I don't think that that's always the case. I think that sometimes if they have not had a growth spurt, if they're still kind of like in that, little kid stage, like elementary sized student, and they have that growth spurt over the summer between 7th and 8th grade, or 8th and 9th grade, or 9th and 10th grade, wait until they're on the other side of that growth spurt and then try the larger equipment. When you put a bigger instrument in someone's hands, there has to be a level of resistance somewhere. It can't just be the most free-flowing instrument ever, because you don't have control over it. If there's no resistance anywhere in the setup, they'll create resistance at the lips. And then you have an issue of they're going to feel like they're losing control if you take away that resistance at the lips. So make sure that they're ready for the instrument change or the mouthpiece change based on the student, not based on a timeline for everyone in the class. I think that's fundamentally important. I hope that helps. I can talk about that more if you'd like, if you want to follow up with another question. Okay, Cody Hammer on the Facebook feed. So I mainly work with middle school trombones. Is there a way to help open up their sound? I would like them to have a good, distinct trombone sound. See above the question I just answered for John. There's a lot of the same stuff that going on with what I would have you do. I think that one of the misnomers, we talk about having the teeth open. I want to be clear about how far apart the teeth need to be successful on the instrument. There was a point in time when I would teach, and I still think that there's merit in this. The size of the shank can help a student sort of zero in on how much their mouth should be open, and it's specific to the brass instrument. So obviously the French horn mouthpiece is very small comparatively, and the shank is small. So if you put the shank between the teeth, it can give them a rough idea of how far apart the teeth need to be. Now, granted, each student's dental structure and size of their teeth and size of their mouth and size of their tongue, all these things are going to affect it, but it's a nice rough estimate. And so you can have them blow air through the mouthpiece turned around, and it can give them sort of an idea of how far apart the teeth need to be. Now, when I play, my teeth are far apart, but they're not that far apart. But for a younger student who hasn't been doing this very long, it's not going to be as zeroed in anyway. So it at least gives them an idea of how far apart it needs to be. Brett, what's up, Bruce? Love your Facebook page is a great resource. Thank you, Brett. I appreciate that. That means a lot coming from you. You're a fine player yourself, and go Lions. This has been a recent topic of discussion in Texas regarding the region etudes. Do you think young musicians, young students should start their learning process by hearing a recording? Oh, yeah. Do you prefer they hack through a bit before hearing a reference recording? Okay, Brian, I'm gonna come to your question in a minute, but I'm gonna answer Brett's question first. Here's my take on the sample recordings. I think that there's merit in listening to other people play a piece of music. And I used to listen to recordings at the very beginning of the process, particularly for orchestral excerpts. I would actually listen before I would score study. And in some cases, if the conductor had an interpretation that was mainstream, that could help in terms of style. I was listening more for style, though, not for memorization or to avoid any of the work that came on my end. And it's a struggle because while I think that listening to recordings is a wonderful way for a student to develop their sound, a wonderful way for a student. I mean, obviously you have to have a target to aim at. Otherwise, you're sort of, you're throwing darts in the dark and you don't know where you're aiming. You have to have some sort of sound concept, which is hopefully from multiple people. Matt Guilford from bass trombone from the National Symphony once said that he took a little bit from this teacher and a little bit from that teacher, and he kind of threw the parts that he loved of each of his teachers playing, or people that he looked up to. He took parts of their playing, threw it in a blender, whipped it all up, and what poured out was his sound, which was reflective of all these things. And so I think there's merit in listening. Now, listening to the particular etude, I think it all depends on how it's presented, and it depends on how the student uses the tool. Anything that can be created for good can be used for bad, or can be used to sidestep hard work. And you're always going to have people doing that. I don't like working exclusively on all region etudes with students. If I feel like there's a reason to stop and go back and work on something else, it's sort of the NASCAR analogy. If you're running a race and you have a flat tire in a NASCAR race, you can run that car with a flat tire, or you can go take a pit stop and they can put a new tire on, and then you can really run the race again. I think there's some players who are running with 4 flat tires, and they're using the recordings to sort of, again, sidestep that work. I think that if they can put some work in and they get a basic understanding of how the etude works, the understanding of how D minor works, or whatever key the etude is in, and they get a real keen understanding of that, they know what all the terms mean, so that they're not deriving andante cantabile from the recording, but they know what those terms mean and what the approximate tempos are, and they can use the recording as sort of a checklist or a check sheet to make sure that they're on the right track. It's another way to measure your improvement as a musician. I'm going to work on this for a week, and then I'm going to listen to the recording, and then I'm going to see if my instincts and what I think I've learned, if I'm even in the ballpark. And if I'm not in the ballpark, then I've got to go back to the drawing board and start over. And if I am in the ballpark, if maybe what I'm doing is not all that far off from what the recording is doing, then I know that I have a pretty decent musical sense, at least in this setting for this particular etude. I don't mind providing a recording for a student, but I'm probably not going to provide the entire recording. It might be a short chunk. It might be a small passage. I demonstrate all the time, but it's a back and forth demonstration. I play, you play, I play, you play, which is not the same thing as listening to the recording 10,000 times to sort of memorize it. It's another reason why I have them sometimes start in the middle of a phrase, or not start at the beginning, or start at the return of the A material. And I use that sort of terminology to get them to think about, oh, I need to map out the form of this etude so that I know that this is the A section, this is the contrasting B section, this is the recapitulation. If I'm using that terminology with them already, then I'm going to use that when I make my request for where I want them to start in the etude. So again, very, very long or very short answer answered very long. That's sort of my take on the etude thing in respect to recordings. I think they have a place. I think they have a place diagnostically, not in terms of initial development. Hope that helps. Brian Johnston, we can, yeah, I can definitely talk about audition experiences. I have some funny stories. I might do a whole just day on that at some point. And my feed over here on Instagram is dead. I'm going to wave at people who are not here anymore. We are also live on Facebook for anybody that hops on there. We have a few still here. Okay, Brett. Let's see what. Oh, hello, Leandre. How's it going? Yes, agreed. Should not be memorization. More for style reference and collecting personal opinions. Love the NASCAR analogy. Yeah, man. Cool. Glad we're in agreement on that. Yeah, it's a delicate subject because I think that, you know, if you have a band program who has successfully placed a lot of all-state students using a particular method or approach, or they buy a set of recordings from someone and they use that, in terms of getting students into all-state band, then they have found a way that works for their program. And if that's worked historically for a long time, then who am I to argue with that particular thing being successful? But is all-state membership the be-all, end-all metric for how good of a musician someone is? I can think off the top of my head of at least half a dozen people that I went to school with who were never all-state players who have gone on to become incredible musicians. In some cases, I think not making high school all-state in Texas, which at the time was maybe the ultimate goal for them. Not making it was the very thing that fueled them on to show the world that they could do it in spite of not making it. So I don't know.